welcome to the second episode, where this week we will be talking about the nature of people and about free will. So first off, about nature of people, we could probably say that there's three philosophers who are most famous in this field: Thomas Hobbes, Rousseau, and John Locke. Thomas Hobbes, he's most famous for being the one to not only advocate the idea of a social contract, but kind of use it in the sense to establish a dictatorship, which he thought would be a benevolent one. Let's just go over some of his viewpoints and we can just discuss. Hobbes believed that humans were naturally brutal, cruel, and selfish. Their only motivation was to survive through any means possible, naturally greedy. This tendency to survive and defeat other people would increase over time due to survival of the fittest. And without government, in his quote-unquote state of nature, everything would be just chaos, pure chaos. So he thought that the best way to prevent this would be to establish a government, an absolute government in which a monarch or an absolute dictator would be placed over the people, and we'd have to give up our natural freedoms to prevent chaos from destroying us. And ironically, he thought that this is one of the first forms of social contractarianism we've seen.
Yeah.
Now, what do you guys think? You support his point of view?
Well, did he necessarily think humans were fundamentally cruel, or did he think that a strong government would motivate them to act better?
I think it's more like you can't act cruelly.
You cannot act cruel without or you cannot be good without a government, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with his point that we do need some sort of government to function, but I don't necessarily agree with his point that humans are inherently evil.
I would say that overall, when he talks about what people would be like without a government, it's more that what some people would be like without government, right? So there are some people that would actually act evil, and then those people would ruin it for everyone. Because once the first person starts stealing from you, it's
just a domino effect.
Yeah, your only retaliation is really to steal, because you don't really know who took it from you, right? Which leads to overall this dysfunction and this chaos. So I would say that there are some people who ruin it for everyone, and with a strong enough government, you could punish those specific people, with the rest acting like normally and acting like they should, because most of humanity would act pretty basic if not for those small minorities.
I think one of my issues with Hobbes, or at least in how his ideas would play into today's society, is that the government that we establish through the social contract, we have to make sure that those governments don't go crazy on us, because those governments are comprised by the people, right? They're not anyone better than the people. They're regular people. They just happen to be placed in great power and great responsibility.
So you're putting fundamentally cruel and selfish people in places of power.
Right, that could happen.
That's
right?
contradictory.
Hobbes himself acknowledges that everyone is evil and greedy and selfish, so you place one of them in power. He does mention that he wants the person to be like a benevolent ruler, and he thinks that'd be the best scenario. But my problem is, I don't know if that's a possibility. It seems kind of like a
I would
ideal.
say, in Hobbes' defense, that he actually probably meant that in a state of nature, your only motivations are to survive,
right? And
that forces you to be greedy, because that increases your chances of survival, because you're only focusing on yourself and being selfish. But in a non-state of nature, you're able to focus on more things. You're able to focus on art, for example, or science. I think that's what he meant when he said we'll have a dictatorship, or we'll have a strong central authority, because that strong central authority gives everyone the peace of mind to focus on things not survival related.
Well, I would agree with this point that humans are fundamentally selfish, but even like you said, in a state of society we can focus on other things. Aren't we still fundamentally motivated by self-interest? We just have different ways to express it. In a state of nature, obviously you're going to have violence, you're going to have stealing in order to survive, but even in a civilized society, humans are just looking out for their own best interests. There's just a different form of doing it.
I'd say that, well, that is true, and some people will always be selfish. In a state where you actually have civilized society, in a civil state, there's a much higher chance that people will actually be civil and kind towards one another, right? We have charities today. We have organizations dedicated just to helping others. We have very strong nonprofits. But
is that a result of what Hobbes thought?
This is a result of a government, or this is a result of a civil state,
social contract,
or just a state where people are not focused solely on survival, because there is order. So through order, you were able to get people who are not focused simply on themselves. So just there was a small minority of people who would actively act against everyone else in their own interest, there are people who will actively act in favor of everyone else, regardless of their self-interest. I think that's what was enabled.
Well,
Because
one of-
in a state of nature, you wouldn't have charity.
One of the things that Hobbes brought up that I think I agree with, though not necessarily in the way he envisioned it, was the social contract, in which he thought that society is society is a social construct, which sounds kind of self-redundant, but in that society is formed by the people who comprise of it, and you have to recognize that. Obviously, he wanted to use the social contract theory to have everyone agree to install a benevolent dictator in place. But I think that the social contract idea is one that applies even to America today. You know, we have the Constitution, which was something that the people wrote, or at least the founding fathers wrote together, and they agreed on. So I agree with that concept at the very least, where people can agree together to create a society without rights.
I think it's a good time to move on to the second person that we have here, who is Rousseau. So he thought that man was naturally good, and they were corrupted by the unnaturalness of civilization. So he thought that in a state of nature, people would be benevolent, but due to civilization, they can become greedy, which is kind of the opposite of what Hobbes thought.
Oh yeah, and Rousseau kind of takes that social contract idea to that level, where he thinks that people would be able to work together, because mankind naturally wants to work together, and it is just kind of because of the evilness of civilization. So he was actually kind of against management of the people, really.
Well, some evolutionary psychologists today actually argue that society ironically arose from our own self-interest. Because if you think about it, for millions of years we were living in nature, right? Struggling to survive.
Right.
Obviously, when you're in a group that cooperates together, you probably have a lot higher chances of survival.
You get to separate the labor.
Yeah, separate labor. Some people argue that the traits today, like charity, helping each other, actually stemmed from millions of years of us living together in self-interest, not necessarily out of like human benevolence. And it's kind of like what Adam Smith said about we receive the products we do from others not because of benevolence, but because they have an interest in helping us, because they get money from us.
I think that Rousseau, when you say like, I think Rousseau and Hobbes both are actually correct, but like in different ways, right? So like no one's you're not naturally all good or you're not naturally all bad. You're naturally a mix of both, and whichever one like actually is, whichever instinct you act on is probably predicated based on the environment you live in, right? So you're more likely to be selfish in an environment where you need to be selfish to survive, and you'll probably be more giving in an environment where you have lots of resources or you have excess resources. So I think that I would say Rousseau's wrong when he says like people are corrupted by the unnaturalized state of nature. I would say Hobbes is wrong when he says that like the only way to curb insecurity and selfishness is to have a central authority to punish that.
What a beautiful segue into our third focus, John Locke, who actually brought up the concept of tabula rasa, or a blank slate, in that he thought that humans didn't necessarily have an inherent goodness or evil, but were more so formed from government. And he thought that humans kind of had a rationality, more so than an inherent desire for destroying or for building together. It's more like government existed because we were reasonable enough to create one, and we were able to create a state for ourselves. Because in a state of nature, he kind of thought that people would be just generally more equal, more independent. He's kind of a more neutral guy. He thought that society directly influenced the individual.
I think it does, but like the only problem I have with blank slate is that it implies that there's nothing on you when you were born, but instincts were placed on you. Like there are cultural customs that you are born with. There are like genetic
circumstances.
Yeah, and then I'm pretty sure genetics play a part into it as well. I'm sure you were like there is nature and nurture, and obviously nurture matters, but there is part of it that is nature, and I think that blank slate ignores that part.
Okay, so let's move on to our next point, which is what came first, society or humans? So this kind of plays with the idea of nature versus nurture. Which one do you guys think plays a bigger role? Because obviously both play at least some part in a human's personality. But what do you think? Is it more nature or more nurture? That is to say, do humans kind of shape their society, or do society shape the humans created?
I would say that's kind of reciprocal, because society arose from humans who banded together.
Okay.
But then following generations were influenced by the society they created. So it's kind of like a chicken or egg question.
I think they
I would
feed
agree
into
with
each other. It's like a positive feedback loop.
Positive
the more you
feedback
get,
loop.
it just increases.
I think it's more nurture though. I don't know.
I would say it's more nature.
More nature.
I'd say nurture.
What do you think about the nature part?
So I think that at least it's more relevant today, but obviously you're born into a set of societal standards today. You're born into a set of values today, right? Like we all generally, even though we grew up in like different households probably, or like lived far away from one another, we all have generally the same moral code, or at least we accept the same moral foundations without understanding where they came from.
But that's kind of like nurture, though, isn't it? Because you're born into that society and you're learning from them.
But that's the nature.
The
That's
way
like
you
kind
were
of the nature
raised.
you were born
The
in,
way
though.
you were. The
Right.
nature of which you were born. Yeah, I guess
Like
so.
it depends on how you define nature versus nurture, because it's not like it's not like you grew up and your parents were like, all right, so like specifically don't steal, specifically like don't kill. It's that like just from observing like the state around you, you knew like not to do those things. And you probably have evolutionary like
I'm thinking nature.
like-
I think more like evolutionary. Like we know. We are usually born with 5 fingers. Or if we hold our breaths, we all instinctively, as a species, don't want to hold our breaths underwater for over 5 minutes. Stuff like that. I feel like nurture in which you were raised is more important.
Nature leads to nurture. How about that?
Okay.
So you start with nothing, but as you gain experiences, that becomes culture, and then that passes on.
It passes like genetically
No, through customs.
through custom. Okay.
So environmental factors influence how cultures are formed.
Okay.
Would you say you're genetically more like
I mean, I'm not.
you're no? Would you guys say you were more genetically like set up to be selfish, or more genetically set up to be giving, depending on the circumstances?
Probably. Just because we don't know enough about it.
No, but if so, then isn't it more in
No,
more
I'm not
nature
saying
then?
like nature is
but
not
then,
not a
but
part of
wouldn't
it.
nature then be the larger part? Because then you would
Oh,
like if you were
okay.
born with like a selfish mindset, right?
Yeah.
Like and if you think you can actually inherit that, or if you think like that's partly from your genes, then how you view the world, how you view the rest of your nurture will be through a kind of selfish lens.
Right.
So
Okay.
nature will actually then take precedent over nurture.
But I feel like
If you're able to inherit traits like
so
selfishness.
yeah, if you were left completely alone with like nothing else. But I feel like if you're born in a society that really emphasizes like selflessness and giving to others, even if you had that genetic predisposition, I think that in a lot of cases it'd be enough to like override it.
Well, if
Of
we're
course,
looking,
we don't know enough about it, but
well, if we want to look at an extreme example of a society, why don't we look at like ancient Sparta?
Ancient
Where you see,
Sparta.
like you'd say that the conditions they were brought up in went contradictory to the most fundamental parts of human nature. They were taught not to be selfish. They were instead to sacrifice their life for their own state. Some people would say humans are fundamentally iffy about killing others. They were literally taught to be cold-blooded warriors.
Wouldn't
So
you
it's an
say that's
example of what a state can do in
wouldn't-
extreme conditions.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say that's because all the ones who didn't conform to that died?
yeah, no, that's the thing.
So like if you kill off all the people who disagree, obviously the only ones that are left will be the ones that agree, even if they're a small.
I'm
minority.
sure there was
is
that one guy.
There
I'm
is a good
sure.
point, but like actually, most of the people who were killed off as babies for physical defects.
Yeah.
The ones
Right.
who, like you were saying, did not adhere to those, they were actually just sort of outcast by society.
So
And
they
the
were
pressure-
just thrown aside, right?
Yeah, but the pressure on them bent most of them to accept the norms.
So
So like social pressure actually bent them to go against their own
Wait,
nature.
so there probably are some cases where nature is more powerful than nurture. Like you have that
Actually,
level.
Wait, really fast. But if you're throwing away babies because of genetic defects and you're keeping the babies that are genetically strong, wouldn't they be more dispositioned towards violence or like towards like physical
Warrior
action?
culture. They were
Yeah,
that was
because-
the basis of the state. Yeah.
Because if you were born with those traits, right, that's because your ancestors. That means somewhere down the line, those traits were genetically viable or like genetically advantaged at a certain point, right? And they become more so if you select for them artificially. So what you're doing is you're selecting warrior traits, and then as time goes on, obviously you'll get more and more warriors.
So a
because-
strong, physically fit child is more likely to become a warrior than a crippled, deformed.
Yeah, I
child.
would say so.
That's true.
Especially in times where you couldn't fix those deformities,
Yeah.
and like you pretty much had to just hope your children grew up to be warriors,
Okay.
and not like.
So
Okay.
some sets
Yeah.
of genetics like pair better with a certain society
So
than others.
we would say it's a mix of all things.
Oh, well, we know that for sure.
I say it's hard to tell with the current knowledge.
Cool. Okay, with that all in mind, let's go to our second part of today's episode, which is free will. Now, free will, there are a lot of definitions, but typically the most accepted one is that free will is an action or a decision that you make in yourself that's not influenced by the environment. So it's something that you really make on your own, like a true free will. I think that's like a libertarian free will. And of course, on the other hand, there's determinism, which states that free will is just a social construct and that your decisions are made either by external influences or by something else. But it's not you. Not necessarily.
I think it depends on how you define, even though you gave a definition of free will, it's like to what extent would you consider it being you that makes the decision? Is it just that, like, for example, right? Let's say, like, so there are experiments where I think there was an experiment where somebody hooked up like brain signals, and then they asked them to perform certain actions based on the brain signals.
The Bay experiment.
I think that's what it's called. You could predict the action they were going to take before they knew what they were going to do.
Yeah.
But if you say, but technically that's their brain sending those signals.
Yeah.
So technically that's them making the decisions.
But
so I'm not sure if you would consider that them making the decision,
Okay, well,
regardless of their environment.
This is me, but I think that they're the way we reduce human decisions down to the brain kind of necessitates that there has to be external factors that influence it. Like the brain is doing it because of outside influence. It was told, you can flick it anytime you want. The brain's waiting. It notes that like 1 minute has passed. Maybe it's about time to do it, so they send the signal.
But wouldn't you say that's still
influence?
But wouldn't you say that's still free will, because your brain is you, but it's choosing to do that, because you don't have to do that flick.
It's just chemicals though. It's just neurochemicals that you could.
But you could
easily
those to an extent. You control those, wouldn't you say? Because you could turn off. You could choose not to flick.
But that's when you choose not to flick. That's just your brain sending another chemical to negate the first one you sent.
Yeah, but that means you're aware of your ability to do that.
Isn't your conscious mostly affected by the chemicals? Like generally, your conscious you don't consciously determine what hormones and chemicals you send.
It's like pressing Control W on a computer and asking whether the computer chose to shut it off once you inputted it.
No, but let's say like you do have like chemicals in your brain and everything, right?
Yeah.
But theoretically, you choose to act on those chemicals. You're just more dispositioned to taking a certain action, right? So like, let's say like you have anger issues. That doesn't mean everybody with anger issues will always be angry. It means that a larger amount of them will be, but there'll be a select few who choose not to be angry, who are like, for whatever reason, able to not like manifest.
Okay. What would happen if we do this? We put, let's say hypothetically, we can put a person inside a vacuum. Okay.
Like a space with no external
influences. What would happen then? Would they have the free will, or would they be determined to do something without?
Would they have no external influences?
No external influences.
We're using
like
the definition.
If you dropped a baby in a blank room or something.
Yeah.
Or like,
no external influences.
Yeah. Let's say we could somehow do that, and they wouldn't suffocate or something.
Well, then would it even learn to think beyond the primal animalistic level?
Right.
Like,
So
wouldn't it just be instinct that drives that baby then?
Yeah.
Influenced by.
Nothing.
Do
Well,
you think
influenced
so?
by influenced by
Would it be free
instincts.
will?
Survival instincts that have been pre-programmed into it through genetics.
Yeah,
something
but,
that's not necessarily its own choice.
Yeah, but let's say that child grew up, right? And that child's able to make decisions between multiple factors, say like what college they go to or something like that. It's not like you're genetically dispositioned to be like, all right, so specifically Harvard only.
No, but
unless you're Asian.
But then I would unless your parents really want you to. But then that's the thing. Like, are you when you have that choice, like, I really want to go to Harvard, for example, because it has these programs and these programs, and I really like these programs because it fits into my major of philosophy, right? But then the question is that something that you made completely on your own, or is it because of years of growing up, being conditioned or being told by people, you like that, or being exposed to different things?
You get to choose in the end, though. Because if you get to choose in the end, then you're still responsible for your choice.
I feel like it's something where the human has so many layers of outside influence where I can't really say for sure if there's ever that spark of complete unrelated to the environment.
Wait, so the reason but the reason why free will matters is that if you don't have it, there's complications with legal systems and stuff, right?
Sure.
But if you're able to choose, then those complications are gone. Even if there's like hundreds of thousands of factors, so long as in the end you are the factor that actually makes the decision, then technically you have responsibility for your own actions. Because it's not like you're being run by a program out of nowhere that's making you do random stuff.
Well,
it's like you're
speaking of
choosing your stuff.
Speaking of which, could we have let's move on to an example of, let's say, what if we found out all humans were complete robots and free will did not exist? What do you think might be one example of legal complication that could happen?
You wouldn't punish people because it wasn't their fault.
Ooh, that's one of the most famous ones I hear.
Well, if you take a look at the current legal system, a person who successfully claims insanity is basically excused from their murder. Like they're
Yeah,
sentenced to
temporarily.
correction facilities, but not punished.
But if they're truly insane, can they claim insanity?
They can claim temporary
There is
insanity.
temporary
Yeah.
insanity, which is a
So-
weird legal concept and really hard to prove.
So like you were insane for
that
5
time-
minutes, just for
that-
5 minutes.
But-
During that entire time span, you committed the crime, and now you're fine. So you don't need anything.
Oh, okay.
Just let them walk
But
away.
most of the time, it is
okay.
their legal counsels who claim it, not them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So let's say that was a thing though. But if we knew that free will wasn't a thing though, do you think that would be a legitimate excuse that people could use, or if we knew for sure that people had no free will?
Then why isn't our society rampant with crime if everything is determined?
If I can play the devil's advocate here, I'm gonna suggest something I think I might have shared with you guys before. Like, can't we just implement the legal system based on pure statistical correlations? We know that punishing people decreases crime. Doesn't matter if they did it or whether or not they're
No,
responsible for it.
But then the question is, why does it decrease crime?
I don't know.
If you're not,
Correlation with
But
causation.
if your end goal is just to reduce it, and you keep noticing, hey,
but you should notice
it
why,
works.
because maybe there's a more efficient way.
no, sure. But like, what if for the time being we just keep implementing it, even if we know people aren't responsible for their crimes, just because we see that statistical correlation?
It depends on. Okay, it depends. So it's not the justice system. It's just the peace system. Whatever it takes to keep peace.
Yeah, just a peace system.
Well, you could say, like, at what point do the means become too much? Like, what is the point of the justice system? To decrease crime or to
Wait.
protect the lives of good people?
And if you only care about decreasing crime, you could just lock everyone up.
Right,
There's
right.
no crime.
Yeah.
and then
That's the
we
point
get
of
into
the
the
legal
implications.
system, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, what the point of the legal system is.
Then I have a follow-up question to ask. If that's the case, then is determinism random enough, or like when people are determined to make something, is that might as well be free will?
It's random.
Like a chaos theory. So if you guys don't know chaos theory, it's when one small variable influences another variable, which influences more variables, up to the point where it's super complicated. This is why, like, weather patterns, you might be able to predict the general macroscopic, like, direction of a hurricane, but you can't detect every single atom of a hurricane. There's just too many variables going on. So like, if we let's say we accept the fact that the universe is kind of in that same vein, where it's like a completely chaotic, like, well, it's not necessarily random, but it's like super chaotic, and we drop a human person into that system. Well, let's say they had no inherent free will of their own, but that they're influenced by this completely chaotic environment. Do you think that could kind of constitute a pseudo free will, to where the human would be
Again,
It's
really
not
hard.
free will, but-
it depends on how you do free will. Because if free will is like you have the ability to choose in the end, right? Like you technically had both options open and available, and there is a possibility you could have gone a different path with enough variables.
Yeah.
If one of them gives you the ability to choose,
Yeah.
or one of them lets the individual human, even if they didn't necessarily want to choose, but have a choice between two options, then technically for that moment they have free will. At least free will for that decision.
Okay. And I think with that, that's a good place to stop. All right, thank you guys, and we'll see you the next episode.